late 1960s, the Western world experienced a variety of protest movements related to sexual norms, education, women's rights, and a strong anti-war movement against the Second Vietnam War.
The sexual revolution of the 1960s was encouraged by the birth control pill, which gave people more sexual freedom, as well as explicitly sexual movies, plays, and books that emphasized once hidden subjects. Sweden took the lead through sex education in schools, as well as decriminalization of homosexuality, and the rest of Europe and the United States soon followed. Divorce rates shot up, as did premarital and extramarital sexual experiences. These changes led people to term Western society, after World War II, as a permissive society. Many youths protested the U.S. war in Vietnam, which they viewed as an act of aggression and imperialism. In 1968, demonstrations broke out in universities in Italy, France, and Britain. Their goal was to test America's war in Vietnam and encourage an anti-war movement. However, these student protests backfired by provoking a reaction from the people who favored order over lawlessness or privileged young people. In America, 4 students at Kent State University were killed by the Ohio National Guard in 1970. This marked the decline of the anti-war protests. In the late 1960s, women began to speak their rights, and women's liberation movements became more prevalent in society. Betty Friedan was a journalist who published her thoughts on the traditional roles of women and the feminine mystique, stating that women were not equal to men in society. The feminine mystique soon gained popularity, encouraging Friedan to found the National Organization for Women in 1966. Between 1964 and 1982, Leonid Brezhnev led the Soviet Union. Though he was optimistic, he was reluctant to initiate reform. Brezhnev's regime was associated with détente, creating a calm atmosphere and a rule which permitted more access to Western culture. Brezhnev emphasized heavy industry, in which the Soviet Union's production of iron, steel, coal, and cement eventually passed out of the United States. Communist leaders adopted reform programs to make socialism more acceptable to their subject populations. In Poland, continued worker unrest led to the rise of the independent labor movement, Solidarity, led by Lech Wałęsa. The Solidarity was extremely popular and powerful, with the Polish government powerless to stop the flow of concessions until it arrested Wałęsa and other leaders and imposed military rule. Hungary, under the leadership of Dano Kadar, began to legalize small private enterprises and establish fairly friendly relations with the West. The Prague Spring was when Alexander Dubček was elected first secretary of Czechoslovakia's Communist Party in January 1968, and made reforms such as freedom of speech and press. Concerned about the spread of the Spring Fever, the Red Army invaded Czechoslovakia in August 1968 and crushed the reform movement.
After 2 decades of incredible economic growth, Europe experienced severe economic recession in 1973 to 1974 and 1979 to 1983. Both inflation and unemployment rose dramatically. A substantial increase in the price of oil in 1973 was a major cause for the first downturn. A worldwide recession had led to a decline in demand for European goods. Economies recovered in the course of the 1980s, but problems still remain. Political tensions, confusions, and uncertainties rose in Western Germany, Great Britain, France, and Italy. In 1968, Richard Nixon was elected president of the U.S., and he quickly began to end American involvement in the Vietnam. He used illegal methods to gather knowledge on his political opponents, which led to the Watergate scandal, causing a scene that led Nixon to resign as president. After Watergate, economic problems occurred, causing the period from 1973 to the mid-1980s to be identified as stagflation. In 1954, Vietnam was divided to the north under Ho Chi Minh with the Soviet aid, and the south where Americans established a pro-West regime. The U.S. at first supported Ngo Dinh, but later overthrew it due to corruption. The release of the new government caused the Viet Cong to infiltrate from the north of Vietnam, so President Johnson launched bombing raids on the north and sent U.S. troops to the south to stop the communists and the Domino Theory. The U.S. failed to defeat North Vietnam, and anti-war sentiment erupted in the U.S. and other European countries. Nixon pulled out of the war in 1973, and Vietnam was forcefully united under communism, but the Domino Theory was proved unfounded. Soon after, Mao Zedong attempted to create a classless society, which attracted a lot of attention. He pushed China into a state of communism. A cultural revolution soon broke out within China, which further increased Mao's will to completely revolutionize China. In 1957, the first space satellite, Sputnik, went into orbit around Earth, and about a decade later, a spacecraft landed on the moon. The computer, the most revolutionary technological invention of the 20th century, was also invented at this time. People also saw the universe as a complicated relationship between various parts of a unified whole. Art pieces were very large and depicted things that were real or happening. Postmodernism was the main style of architecture and literature, and a return to realism in art was also evident. In postmodernism, authors would combine realistic events with dreamlike or fantastic backgrounds. The major music trend was surrealism, which had no main theme or emotion, so the composer can invent new styles in the work, making the pieces exciting.